that not awesome? I've been playing you the recording from that halal. Seems like another age, another time from Hoshana Rabbah before October 7th. But that was the recording that I made on my phone. And thank God I pushed Moshe and Moshe Storch and the shul to make a real recording. And now I finally got that recording from the microphone. Sounds fantastic. I hope that we can make an album out of that. Wouldn't that be amazing? How's everybody doing? Slide up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Tuesday? Chicago, and it's snowing, says Paula. The other Paula in the Great Northwest, Melissa in Great Neck, Sharon in New Jersey, Joe in the Inland Empire, Lucy in Minnesota, Bill in Missouri, Guy in Ohio, Bella in Florida, Karen in Northern California, Bella in Texas, Jonathan in SoCal, Marcus in Chicago, Joseph in Massachusetts, Frank in San Pedro, Michelle says shalom, Marie in Freeport. Welcome, Frank. I don't think I've seen you here before. So good to have you. If you're new, if you've been lurking for a while, you don't say your name at the beginning. It's good anytime you comment, by the way. It just, brings the live stream to more people. Comments are great. Always put in comments, share, like, any kind of reactions. Just enables more people to see this class. And we need more people to be doing mitzvahs. If you're Jewish, so many mitzvahs to choose from. We are all one people. Every mitzvah helps increase the peace all over the world, but especially in Israel. If you're not Jewish, you got all the Noahide commandments to choose from. Any mitzvahs we do increases the peace. It's a great way to contribute. I did a little video about that this morning. It's on Facebook, it's on Instagram, it's on TikTok. All the haters come out and you say, let's increase the peace in Israel. Are we going to let them stop us? No way. I was walking down the street today after afternoon prayers, and I'm a hat guy. I've always loved hats, and I tend to wear a hat just keep my head covered, not to cover my kippah, although sometimes I'm more comfortable walking down the street in a hat, one of my fedoras or a baseball cap. Not because I'm embarrassed to wear a kippah, but because I've just always been like, what if I make a mistake? What if I say or do something wrong? I don't want to be a bad representative of the Jewish people. But a friend of mine said, and my friends also know that I'm involved in security. A friend of mine said, Sal, I'm surprised to see you walking down the street in a kippah as a security guy. Do you want to be a target? He was wearing a kippah also. I said, you know what? I usually am a hat guy, but right now we got to stand proud. No disparagement whatsoever to people living in really dangerous areas who just don't feel comfortable walking down the street in a kippah right now. You do what you want. You do what is right and wise for you. But for me, I feel like now more than ever, we got to stand proud as Jews. And if the haters, if the anti-Semites, the people who want us dead, are leading us to skulk around in the corners afraid, then that's another battle we've lost. So that's not me. So let's learn some Torah. Let's stand our post and do what we can to increase the peace and the safety of Israel. Okay, we dedicate today's learning to Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach. It is his yahrzeit today. He brought down so many melodies that have just become standard in synagogues across the spectrum, from Hasidic to Reform. So many people are using Shlomo's melodies. He really just turned on so many people to that inspiring, uplifting dimension of the tradition, and we honor him for that. So I believe it was a Rabbi Shlomo ben Naftali, if I've got that right. But at any rate, Shlomo Karlbach, may the neshama have a great aliyah, and may our learning today in your honor build you up even a little higher in the world to come. We are on page 73, continuing our discussion in chapter 4 of Mishnah number 1 here in Tractate Kiddushin, the 20th volume of the Talmud. We've been talking about that when Ezra brought the exiles back at the beginning of the Second Temple period, he had all different sort of categories in terms of lineage of Jews with him. Priests, Kohanim, Levites like me, Israelites, the vast majority of the Jewish people, but also there were mamzers and Gibeonites, disqualified priests because they or their father had married a divorced woman who's not permitted to them, etc. And we've been having a discussion about these various categories and who's allowed to marry who and why and what happens if somebody marries somebody who's not permitted to them. So we continue that. Just a few paragraphs from the top on 73a. So the Gemara says, the statement of the Tosefta that a convert and an emancipated slave and a halal, a disqualified priest because he or his father married a divorced woman, are all permitted to marry the daughter of a priest. And this supports the opinion of Rav. As Rav Yehuda says, that Rav says, women of unflawed lineage who are daughters of priests were not prohibited from marrying those disqualified from the priesthood due to flawed lineage, known as halalim, since that prohibition applies only to male priests, right? A male priest is not permitted to marry a divorced woman, and as long as he's married to her, he is a disqualified priest. And his son, who's a regular Jew in every way and permitted to marry any other Jew, but his son is disqualified from serving as a priest in the temple. Nevertheless, even if he is a halal, any Jewish woman, including the daughter of a priest, can marry him. Now, Rabbi Zera taught in Mechoza, this town in Bavel, the Babylonian Jewish community, it is permitted for a convert to marry a mamzeres, right? A female mamzer. And the female, and we talked a little bit about this yesterday. So a mamzer is the offspring of a heavily prohibited union, not just a priest and a divorced woman, but either the offspring of incest or adultery. Right? I think it was Jonathan said yesterday, it's very discomforting for us to talk about a child who, through no fault of his own, is not permitted to marry most of the Jewish community, can marry a convert, but sadly, and I looked this up yesterday, Bill, sadly, the offspring of a convert can marry a mamzer, but their child is a mamzer. But just looking at this very harsh fate that awaits the child of either incest or adultery. The child didn't do anything wrong. It's very sad. It's hard to understand the rules. But I will ask you this. Would you want your child to marry a child of incest? Do you want your son or daughter to marry the offspring of an incestuous union, let's say between a brother and sister or a father and daughter, something awful like that? It's really not a family you want to marry into if you're honest, right? So, something to think about. Okay, so here we are, that Rabbi Zera taught in Mechoza that it is permitted for a convert to marry a mamzeres, that's the law, and everyone stoned him with their esrogim since there were many converts present, and they were insulted by this statement. Now, why are converts insulted by the fact that they're permitted to marry mamzers? Answer, because the derivation of this law that other Jews are not permitted to marry mamzers, only mamzers can marry mamzers, or slaves can marry mamzers, but the vast majority of Jews are not permitted to marry a mamzer. Why is a convert permitted? And it's because the convert, who is definitely part of the Jewish community in every way, and the Torah says over and over and over again that a convert is a full-fledged Jew, and you are violating a serious prohibition if you make a convert uncomfortable in any way by reminding them that they're converts, they weren't born Jewish. That's a sin for another Jew to do that. So why is it that a convert would be permitted to marry a mamzer while other Jews can't? And it was just sort of the derivation of the language in the Torah, how the sages derive that. That this word kahila, congregation, sort of includes large groupings, right? Like the kahila of the priests, the kahila of the Levites, the kahila of Yisrael, and the converts as a group are not called a kahila, right? They're just converts who weren't born Jewish. And then deriving from that use of language, the law is, according to Rabbi Yossi, and it is the law, that they can marry a mamzer. Okay. So what of it? So now when Rabbi Zera taught this in Mechoza, the converts didn't like it, right? They were insulted by it. And Rava said, is there a person who teaches such a matter in a place where there are many converts? He should have been more diplomatic and cautious. Now Rava himself taught this in Mechoza to ameliorate the situation. It is permitted for a convert to marry the daughter of a priest, right? It's a very, elite lineage, as it were. And they carried him on a silk. They in other words, they gave him great honor when he said that. Listen, converts might be permitted to marry mamzers, but they're also permitted to marry the daughters of priests. And they carried him on silk for elevating the honor of converts. He later taught them, and it is permitted for a convert to marry a mamzer. And they said to him, you have forfeited the honor of your first sermon. And Rava said to them, I have done for you what is good for you. If a convert wishes, he may marry from here, i.e. from those of pure lineage, and if he wishes, he may marry from there, like a mamzer. But he should know that if he marries a mamzer, the children of that union will be mamzers. Now the Gemara concludes, and the law is, it is permitted for a convert to marry the daughter of a priest, and it is permitted for him to marry a mamzeris. It is permitted for a convert to marry the daughter of a priest, since women of unflawed lineage were not prohibited from marrying those disqualified for the priesthood. And it is permitted for him to marry a mamzeris in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, who holds that the congregation of converts is not called a congregation. They're full-fledged Jews. It's just that they are not known as a kahila of converts. Now, the Mishna teaches, going back to our Mishnah number 1, as we're working our way through it, the Mishnah taught, and these are the last two categories, right, that Ezra brought with him at the beginning of the Second Temple period, from Bavel back to Eretz Yisrael. A shituki, what is a shituki? This is any person who knows the identity of his mother, but does not know the identity of his father. And Rava says, by Torah law, a shituki is fit to enter the congregation. And what is the reason for this? Because most men are fit with regard to her, meaning most men are fit to engage in intercourse with an unmarried woman for the purpose of creating marriage, right? It's not that they're giving a license for extramarital sex. They're certainly not. They're simply saying that most men could be betrothed with most women, right? Because most men are not mamzers and most women are not mamzers. And so we're talking about Jews, they are free to marry each other. And in this case, the father didn't marry the woman. That's why the son or daughter is a shituki, where they know the identity of the mother, but they don't know the identity of the father. The parents are not married. And, maybe she had a one-night stand and no one knows who the father is. That's the situation we're talking about. But if it's a non-Jew, then it doesn't matter because the child is a Jew. The child of a Jewish mother who either married a Gentile or didn't marry anyone at all, that child is a Jew. and a full-fledged Jew who can marry even somebody of unflawed lineage. It would only be a problem if the father turned out to be a mamzer, but most men are not mamzers, right? And even if it was a Jewish man, who fathered this child with a Jewish woman, but they weren't married, that doesn't create a mamzer. Mamzer is only the child of adultery or incest. So most people wouldn't create a mamzer, and that's why we say that a shituki, following the majority of possible cases, is not a mamzer and is fit to marry into the congregation. Right? What is the reason for this? Most are fit with regard to her, and only a minority are unfit with regard to engaging with her. There are few men who are related to a woman in a way that would render her offspring mamzer. Rava analyzes two possibilities. And if they came to her, i.e., if the father came to the mother's location when the child was conceived, the following principle with regard to an uncertain prohibition takes effect. Anything that separates from its fixed location is presumed to have separated from the majority of items like it in that location. So if the father separated from the population at large and came to the mother, one can assume that he was from the majority, who are of unflawed lineage. Now, what might you say? That perhaps she went to them and the child was conceived in the place where the father was. So in such a case, it is an uncertain prohibition located in its fixed place. And the halakhic principle is anything fixed is considered as though it were half and half, i.e. 50%. And it remains a case of uncertainty, and it should be prohibited for the shituki to marry a Jew with unflawed lineage, right? So under the first analysis, the father is likely to have come from the majority who are of unflawed lineage, so that's what the status that we would give the shituki. And in the second case, where somehow the father separated himself from that and came to the mother, and now we're not sure, but we don't know what population the father came from. We can't say that he came from this town or he came from this demographic. We don't know anything about him. So now we're going to say, okay, well, maybe we have to render this 50-50 possibility that he's a mamzer or not. Now, this law is stated like this a little bit more clearly. If an unmarried woman was known to have engaged in sexual intercourse within a certain city, then even if only one Gentile or one halal or one Canaanite slave lived there, she may not marry a priest ab initio. It is viewed equally likely as not that she engaged in intercourse with someone who disqualified her from marrying a priest. After the fact, if she did marry a priest, he is not forced to divorce her if she claims that she engaged in intercourse with someone of unflawed lineage. And in any case, this does not suffice to prevent her shituki child from marrying a Jew with unflawed lineage, since the Torah states, a mamzer shall not enter into the congregation of the Lord. And this indicates it is a definite mamzer, one we know to be a mamzer, who may not enter. But one who is a mamzer as a result of an uncertainty may enter. Similarly, it is into a congregation of those with definite unflawed lineage that he may not enter, but into a congregation with those whose uncertain lineage, into a congregation who has uncertain lineage, he may enter. Therefore, even if it is uncertain if one is a mamzer by Torah law, he may marry a Jew with unflawed lineage, right? So really the problem, the status that you would hate to have is definite mamzer. Possible mamzer, pretty much you can marry anybody. And in any case, this does not suffice to prevent, I just read that. And for what reason did the sages nevertheless, so that's by Torah law, but the sages nevertheless say that a shituki is of flawed lineage? It is due to a rabbinic decree lest he marry his sister from his father, since the identity of his father is unknown. So the Gemara asks, if that is so, it should not be permitted for a shituki to marry even a female shituki, lest he marry his sister from his father. And the Gemara responds, and do people engage in licentiousness to such an extent that one should be concerned that all the children of unknown paternity in one city were fathered by the same man? By the same reasoning, there should also be a decree that a shituki may not marry the daughter of a female shituki from a proper marriage, lest he marry his sister from his father, since the man who married the female shituki might have been his father. Rather, it must be that it is not common for a shituki to happen to marry his sister, and therefore he may marry the daughter of a female shituki, and so too it is not common for him to happen to marry his sister, and the sages would not issue a decree to prevent this from occurring, right? Rabbinic decrees are not issued for, very seldom seen situations, only more common situations. Now the question therefore remains, why did they render it prohibited for a shituki to marry a Jew with unflawed lineage? Right? It's not just that a shituki is, they say unflawed lineage, definite unflawed lineage, but the shituki can marry, any kind of flawed lineage. That doesn't mean only can marry a mamzer, could even marry, a halal, the son of a priest by a divorced woman. So they have a lot more options. It's just that they don't want the shituki to marry into a family of unflawed lineage. And so the question is, why? And the Gemara answers that it is not prohibited for a shituki to marry a Jew with unflawed lineage due to any halachic concern. Rather, the sages established a higher standard with regard to lineage, in that they rendered it prohibited for people with unknown backgrounds to marry those with unflawed lineage. In other words, people who have unflawed lineage, they wanted to preserve the unflawed lineage. And Rava says a similar statement. By Torah law, a foundling, which is a child found in the marketplace whose parents are unknown, right? This child doesn't know who his father is or who his mother is. This child is fit, and there is no reason, no concern that this child might be a mamzer. And what is the reason for this? Well, if you analyze the situation, a married woman who becomes pregnant through extramarital intercourse, right, that would be a mamzer, right? It would be someone who had an affair and had committed adultery. But when that actually happens, that woman usually ascribes the child to her husband, right? She doesn't admit it. The father, she just tells her husband that he's the father, and she's the only one who knows, and this never comes up because it's not, Elijah will know the truth, God will know the truth, but the community will not know. Since everyone assumes that her husband is the father, she has no reason to abandon the child in the marketplace. So what case is there where a mother would want to abandon her mamzer child? Well, there's the minority of situations involving betrothed women who committed adultery but cannot claim that her betrothed is the father since they had not been living together. And there is the minority of women whose husbands have gone overseas and could not have fathered the children. Since there are many other cases of unmarried women who might abandon their children, although those children have unflawed lineage, right? Remember, a single woman who has a child, that does not create flawed lineage. It's not a great family situation, but flawed lineage is a mamzer or a halal, etc. So, if you find a child in the marketplace, the idea that it would be a mamzer is actually the minority of possible situations. It's much more likely that this was a single woman, just couldn't understand, who couldn't, didn't want to admit to the world that she mothered a child, doesn't know who the father is, and thought that maybe the child would be better off if it found new parents. And that's why it's abandoned, but not because the child is a mamzer. So that's why we don't assume that the foundling is a mamzer. We assume that the foundling is not a mamzer. That's what Rava is explaining. Where am I? Now, there are also, who else might be found in the marketplace? There are also children with unflawed lineage who are abandoned by their parents, married parents, but they're abandoned due to hunger. The concern, right? They were abandoned because they can't feed the child, and the child will survive, if it won't starve to death if they find other parents for it. And that's why they abandon it. But that child is not a mamzer. Right? And the Torah states, a mamzer shall enter into the congregation of the Lord, which indicates it is only one who is a definite mamzer who may not enter, but one who is a mamzer as a result of uncertainty may enter. And similarly, it is into a congregation of those with definite unflawed lineage that he may not enter, but into a congregation of those with uncertain lineage he may enter. This child is a mamzer as a result of uncertainty and by Torah law may marry a Jew with unflawed lineage. So we can't be sure who the parents are, but for all those reasons, if there is a foundling, we don't assume he's a mamzer and he can basically marry anyone because the percentages dictate that. Now, for what reason, given all of that, did the sages, by rabbinic decree, say that a foundling is unfit, meaning unfit to marry someone of unflawed lineage? Well, lest he marry his sister from his father. And the Gemara asks, well, if that is so, it should not be permitted for a foundling to marry even a female foundling, lest he marry his sister from either his father or his mother. The Gemara rejects this, as they are they continually throwing away all these children? It is likely that the same parents abandoned. Is it likely that the same parents abandoned both a son and a daughter? If you accept that suggestion, it should not be permitted for him to marry the daughter of a foundling, lest he marry a sister, as perhaps the father of the one he wishes to marry is his father as well. So rather, it must be that it is not common for a foundling to happen to marry his sister, and therefore he may marry the daughter of a foundling. And so too it is not common for him to happen to marry his sister, and the sages would not make a decree to prevent that from occurring. So the question remains, so why did the sages prohibit a foundling from marrying a Jew with unflawed lineage? And the answer is because the sages established a higher standard with regard to lineage, meaning once you have a family that has unflawed lineage, we'd like to keep it that way, so those people with unflawed lineage don't marry foundlings, but foundlings can marry other foundlings or people of uncertain lineage, etc. Now we're on 73b. Rava bar Rav Huna says, if an abandoned boy was found, he is not subject to the laws of a foundling. What? Isn't an abandoned boy a foundling? What is Rava bar Rav Huna saying? If an abandoned boy was found, he is not subject to the laws of a foundling. If the baby's lineage were unfit, his parents would not have gone to the trouble. Oh, I'm sorry. I skipped a word. If an abandoned boy was found and he is circumcised, he is not subject to the laws of a foundling. Okay. Circumcision takes him out of the law of foundlings. Why? If the baby's lineage were unfit, his parents would not have gone to the trouble of circumcising him. Likewise, if his limbs were adjusted, indicating that he was cared for after birth, he is not subject to the laws of a foundling. Similarly, if he was anointed with oil, or if his eyes were smeared with eye salve, or if he was adorned with rings, or if a note was hanging on him, or if an amulet was hanging on him, he is not subject to the laws of a foundling, right? Because now you see this was probably parents who loved the child. They were forced through terrible circumstances to give up the child, but it's not some other situation of questionable lineage, and that's why we say he's not subject to the laws of a foundling. This is assumed to be of somebody of unflawed lineage. Now, concerning a child that was found hanging from a palm tree in a basket, if he was in such a place that an animal could reach him, then he is subject to the laws of the foundling. But if he was placed on a palm tree in a way that his basket could not be reached by an animal, he is not subject to the laws of a foundling, since he was cared for enough to be placed in a safe location. Right? Are you getting images of Moses being placed into the river and being found by Pharaoh's daughter? Right? He was a foundling, as far as the Egyptians were concerned, but he was placed in there, obviously in a caring and loving way, and to save his life. There was no reason to assume that he had some kind of flawed lineage. In fact, Moses was a Levite, and his sister Miriam tracked the basket and then suggested to Pharaoh's daughter, Bastia, that she could find a suckling nurse for the boy, who was the boy's own mother, actually. And those 3 years that he spent, being nursed by his mom before being turned back over into Pharaoh's household, had a permanent and salutary effect on Moses in his life. Now, similarly, if the child was placed in a thicket near a town where people are not commonly found, well, then he's subject to the laws of a foundling. But if not, he is not subject to the laws of the foundling. If the child was discovered in a synagogue near a town and people are commonly found there, he is not subject to the laws of the foundling, since the parents wanted to give him to others. But if not, if the synagogue was not near a town, or if it was not frequented by people, he is subject to the laws of a foundling. A Maimar said, with regard to this cistern, a well, right, of well water, into which date pits are placed, this is called a peira de souffle, into which date pits are placed as animal fodder. If a child is found there, well, then he's subject to the laws of the foundling. If he was found in the middle of a fast-flowing river with boats passing by, then he is not subject to the laws of the foundling, presumably because the parents placed him there so people would find him. If he was placed at the side of the river, he is subject to the laws of a foundling. If he was found at the sides of a public domain, which is not frequented by many people, he is not subject to the laws of the foundling. But if the child was discovered in the public domain itself, where he might easily be trampled, he is subject to the laws of a foundling. Rava said, and in famine years, he is not subject to the laws of a foundling. Right? In famine years, even people of good family who would never abandon their child in normal circumstances, but they're starving and they might abandon the child so that the child can live. I was just sharing this story. It's a short daf today. I was just sharing this story with a friend of mine, one of my oldest friends in the world, one of my best friends, and he's Polish and Catholic, and so the story is that during the Holocaust in Poland, there was a Jewish couple who had a baby, and they saw what was coming, and that they were very likely to be killed. So they gave the baby to an older Polish woman, might have been their housekeeper. And they said, listen, we don't know if we're going to survive. We want to come back, but just in case we don't, here are the names of our family in America. And, when the war ends, if we don't come back, then please send this baby to its family in America. And, here's all the money that we have. Please take care of our child. They were then picked up, sent to Auschwitz, and they were murdered. They did not survive the Holocaust. This Polish woman came to love the child so much, and by 1946, the parents hadn't come back. So now, she knows that she's supposed to send the child to its family in America, but she loves the child, and she wants to do what she believes is best for the child, which would be to baptize it, and she would adopt it, and then the child would be raised as a non-Jew. But her conscience bothered her enough about this that she consulted her local priest, a parish priest. Sadly, many priests in that situation would have said, great, baptize the child, absolutely. But this priest said, no, that's the wrong thing to do. The child is a Jew. The parents gave you the instructions. You have to find that family in America and get that child to his family in America. And that's what the woman did. And the child was raised in America, actually became a very successful businessman, lived a Jewish life, and gave millions to charity. But that priest was an interesting fellow. I know I'm going to butcher the pronunciation, but his name was something like Karol Walchak, something like that. And people who know that story, recognize that name, will recognize that he went on to become Pope John Paul II. And there was, before that had happened, there was a Rebbe, a very prominent Rebbe in Israel, who heard this story about the priest who told the woman to send the child to its parents. And when he heard that story, like probably in the in the 1970s or something. He said, that priest, he will go very far, and I bless him that he should go as far as possible in his career. And he became the Pope. So there you go. That's not really a story of foundlings at all, but you can understand the story of parents in great distress, forced to give up the child, not because they're, some kind of wicked people who would just abandon a child to the elements. It was something they were forced to do. All right, let's keep going. Where am I? Okay, so Rav has said, and in famine years, a child that is found is not subject to the laws of the foundling, right? We assume this is a child of unflawed lineage. And the Gemara asks, with regard to this statement of Rava, to which specific case is it referring? If we say it is referring to the case where the child was left in the public domain because it is a famine year, would a mother kill him by placing him in a place where he's likely to be trampled? Rather, if Rava's statement is referring to the case where the child was found at the sides of a public domain, why specifically mention famine years? Even when it is not famine years, the child was placed in a safe location where he was likely to be found. So rather, it must be that when Rava's law was stated, it was stated with regard to that which Rav Yehuda says that Rabbi Abba says, that Rabbi Yehuda Bar Zafti says that Rav says. As long as the abandoned child is still in the marketplace, his father and mother are deemed credible with regard to him when they later claim the child as theirs, right? Let's say they came back from the Holocaust or they've managed to find food during the famine. But once the child has been collected from the marketplace, they are no longer deemed credible with regard to him, meaning unless they bring proofs that that is their child. Now, the Gemara asks, what is the reason for this? So Rava said, since the child has already been publicized with the name of being of flawed lineage as a foundling, they cannot change the status of the child. And it is with regard to this law that Rava says, and in famine years, although the child has been collected from the marketplace, his father and mother are deemed credible with regard to him, as it is common even for parents of unflawed lineage to abandon their children in famine years, and it is likely that they are speaking the truth, that this is their child and is of unflawed lineage. Rav Chisda says there are 3 cases where people are deemed credible if they immediately offer testimony with regard to a matter about which they are not ordinarily deemed credible to testify. And these are those cases: a foundling, a midwife, and one who exempts her friends from uncertain impurity. The Gemara will explain. How so? The case of a foundling is that which we said, that his parents can testify with regard to his lineage before he is collected from the marketplace. The case of a midwife is as is taught in a Baraisa. A midwife is deemed credible to say that this child emerged first from the womb and that child emerged second from the womb. Her testimony is relied upon to determine which of them is the firstborn. Why would there be any question of this? Well, we're talking about a single witness. And we're going to believe her while she's standing in place, as it were, and she just saw the 2 children emerge. But if she comes back the next day, I mean, how good a look did she get at these newborn babies that she could just tell them apart? Then it's too late. Right, a midwife is deemed credible to say which one emerged first and which second. But if she left the birthing room and then returned, then she's not deemed credible, since the babies might have been exchanged in the meantime. Rabbi Eliezer says if she has stood in her place, she is deemed credible. But if not, she is not deemed credible. And so the Gemara asks, what is the difference between these 2 rulings? And the difference between them is in a case when the midwife turned her head aside after the birth. According to Rabbi Eliezer, she is no longer deemed credible, despite having remained in the room. How could she track, really, which child is which child once they're not in her hands? What is the case of one who exempts her friends? As we learned in the Mishna, Tractate Nida, page 60b, if there were 3 women who were sleeping in one bed, this is nothing licentious, in the old days, people shared beds all the time. It was like, they couldn't imagine the luxury that we live in. Everybody has their own bed. Really? Wow, you're all rich. That's what people would have said in the ancient world. But people always shared beds. So there were 3 women who were sleeping in one bed, and blood, meaning menstrual blood, was found beneath one of them. So then they are all deemed impure as menstruating women, as it is not known from which of them the blood came. But if one of them examined herself and was found to be impure, i.e. she saw that she was the one who was menstruating, and she knew it was her, then she would be impure. And we're just talking about ritually impure, right? Meaning that she would be prohibited to her husband for 2 weeks, until she finishes her flow, observes 7 clean days, etc. Since she's sleeping in a bed with 3 women, she's probably unmarried. So what we're talking about is that she has, tuma of a nida. So if she, for example, came into contact with teruma, food that only priests can eat, and they can only eat it in a state of ritual purity, so that teruma would be disqualified through contact with the nida. So that's where the area of law where this matters. And you would want to know, if one of the women who was in this bed ended up touching the teruma, well, did she disqualify that food for the use of the priest? Right, so if you could identify which of the women was the nida, and then the other ones would just be, would be tahor, ritually pure, and it was one of them who touched the teruma, so that would spare the teruma from being disqualified. Right, so Rav Chisda said this applies provided that she examined herself to determine that she's the nida within the period of time needed for the onset of menstruation, meaning immediately after the discovery of the menstrual blood in the bed. But if she did so even a short while later, then her discovery is not accepted as proof with regard to the source of the blood, because 2 of them could have been a nida. And the sages taught if several women gave birth at the same time, the midwife is deemed credible to say, this baby is a priest, and that baby is a Levite, and this baby is a Gibeonite, and that baby is a mamzer. In other words, she's deemed credible to say which baby was born to which mother. In what case is this statement said? When no objection was registered about it. But if an objection was registered about it, then she is not deemed credible because she's a single witness. Now the Gemara clarifies an objection of what type. If we say it is an objection of one witness claiming that her testimony is not accurate, but doesn't Rabbi Yochanan say there is no objection with less than 2 witnesses? So rather the Baraisa must refer to the objection of 2 witnesses. But she is deemed credible when contradicted by a single witness. And if you wish, I could say to you that she is not deemed credible even when contradicted by the objection of 1 witness. And when Rabbi Yochanan said that there is no objection with less than 2 witnesses, that statement applies only in a case where there is a presumption of validity, which can be countered only by the objection of 2 witnesses. But in a case where there is no presumption of validity, such as this case, when the baby was just born, so 1 witness is also deemed credible to object. Similarly, if the owner of an item being purchased is confronted by 2 people, each claiming to have purchased that item, he is deemed credible to say, I sold to this one and I did not sell to that one. In what case is this statement said? When the item being purchased is still in the seller's possession. But if the item being purchased is not in his possession, he is not deemed credible any more than a single witness is. We're on 74a now. We're going to just go ahead a little bit so that we can do a double daf tomorrow, help us get caught up. Now the Gemara asks, and let us see from whom he took the money, as it will be obvious that this is the person who bought the item. So the Gemara answers, no, it is necessary to teach this law in a case where the seller took money from both of them. And he then said, 1 payment I accepted willingly, and 1 payment was given to me against my will, and it is not known which person gave him money in accordance with his will and which did so against his will. In that case, if the item is no longer in the seller's possession, he is not deemed credible to testify to whom he sold it. The Gemara cites the continuation of the Baraisa. Similarly, a judge is deemed credible to say, I found this person victorious in a civil case, and I found this one obligated to pay. Right? A judge says, I had 2 people come before me, one suing the other for damages, and this is the one who was suing and won, and that is the defendant who lost and had to pay damages. And the judge is deemed credible to say that. But in what case is this statement said? When the litigants are still standing before him. But if the litigants are not standing before him, and they have left his presence, then he is not deemed credible any more than a single witness would be. And the Gemara asks, and let us see who holds the writ of a favorable verdict. Why is there a need to rely on the statement of the judge? And the Gemara answers, no, it is necessary to teach this law in a case where they both have writs of a favorable verdict and they have been torn up and cannot be examined. Now, the Gemara asks, if so, then let him return and judge them again, and presumably the same verdict will be issued. And the Gemara answers, it was a case of the judge's discretion. In certain cases, the verdict depends on the decision of the judges based solely on their sense of which litigant deserves to win. There's no guarantee that they will make the same decision the second time around. And the Gemara continues to discuss the credibility of various people with regard to establishing a firstborn. Rav Nachman says 3 are deemed credible with regard to stating that a child is a firstborn, and they are a midwife, his father, and his mother. A midwife is deemed credible only immediately. His mother is deemed credible all the first 7 days after his birth, and his father is deemed credible forever. As it is taught in a Baraisa, expounding the verse, but he shall acknowledge the firstborn, Deuteronomy 21:17, and the sages said the father shall acknowledge him to others. In other words, the father is deemed credible to tell the community that this particular child is his firstborn. And from here, Rabbi Yehuda said a person is deemed credible to say, this is my firstborn son. And just as he is deemed credible to say, this is my firstborn son, so too, if he is a priest, he is deemed credible to say about his son, this is a son of a divorced woman, or this is a son of a chalutza, which would render him a halal. And the rabbis say, as far as these latter claims are concerned, the father is not deemed credible. He is deemed credible to state only which son is the firstborn, again, because he's a single witness. Now, the Mishna teaches that Abba Shaul would call a shituki, one who knows who his mother is but not his father, by a different name. He would use the label beduki. And the Gemara asks, what is the meaning of beduki? If we say that they examine, bodekin, his mother, and if she says, I engage in sexual intercourse with a man of unflawed lineage, in which case she is deemed credible, then with whose opinion does this halacha, this law accord? With that of Rabban Gamliel. But we already learned this on another occasion, as we learned in a Mishnah in Tractate Ketubot 13a, if an unmarried woman was pregnant, and they said to her, what is the status of this fetus? And she said to them, it is from so-and-so, and he is a priest. Then Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer say, she is deemed credible. And Rabbi Yehoshua says, we don't live from, i.e. we don't rely on the words of her mouth, and she is not trusted. And Rabbi Yehuda says, and that Shmuel says, the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rabban Gamliel, that we do believe her. What then did Abba Shaul add beyond that which was already taught in that other Mishnah? Just get ready. I'm near the end of class. If you've got questions or comments, please get them in. So the Gemara answers Abba Shaul's statement that the woman is deemed credible when she states that the father of the child was of unflawed lineage is nevertheless necessary. One law was stated in order to render her fit to marry a priest, and one law was stated to render her daughter fit to marry a priest as well. And the Gemara asks, this works out well according to the one who says, according to the statement of the one who deems her fit to marry a priest, he nevertheless deems her daughter unfit, as her credibility does not extend to her daughter who never had a presumptive status of unflawed lineage. Abba Shaul therefore presents a novel ruling that if she claims to have engaged in intercourse with a man of unflawed lineage, she is deemed credible even with regard to the status of her daughter. But according to the one who says, according to the statement of the one who deems her fit to marry a priest, he deems her daughter fit to do so as well, what is Abba Shaul coming to teach us? And the Gemara answers, the statement of Abba Shaul is preferable and is more far-reaching than the statement of Rabban Gamliel, as if the law were learned only from there, the case of an unmarried woman, I would say, well, there it is a case where most are fit with regard to her, as it is permitted for most people to engage in intercourse with a single woman in terms of producing unflawed offspring. But in a circumstance where most are unfit with regard to her, for example, if she was already betrothed and claimed that the man betrothed to her was the father, right, where all other men are prohibited to her, you might say this: she is not deemed credible when she claims to have engaged in intercourse with a man that would result in the child being of unflawed lineage, as only a small minority of people, meaning only her betrothed, would not render the child unfit, because if any other man is the father, then that's a mamzer, right? Whether she's betrothed or married, if she has sex with a man not her betrothed or not her husband, that child of that union would be a mamzer. So anyone other than her betrothed, if that's the father, the child is unfit and is totally unfit, is a mamzer. Therefore, Abba Shaul's law was necessary in order to include that case. And Rava says the law is in accordance with the statement of Abba Shaul. And that concludes our teaching for today and our discussion of Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 4. Tomorrow we'll pick it up with Mishnah number 2. Time for just a few questions. Joseph, is not entering the congregation like Kares without personal blame? No, I don't think so, right? Kares is the punishment for the people who, among other things, commit incest, right? So if somebody has sex with somebody who is prohibited to them, then Kares applies. Kares applies in other situations as well. Kares is death at the hands of the heavenly court, right? It's definitely a highly prohibited sin, but it's not one that is a death penalty offense in an earthly court. And the sages argue in other places, what does Kares mean exactly? But it's some kind of unnatural shortening of a person's life because they committed this sin. Now, people who've committed such a sin might be able to atone for it and outweigh it with other deeds, and maybe their life won't be shortened so much, but that's in the hands of heaven. It's the offspring of that union who is a mamzer and is prohibited from entering into the congregation of the Lord. So while sort of kares and mamzer status, may both attach to where there was an incestuous union, or now an adulterous union, that's not kares, right? Adultery can be, if proven in court, is a death penalty offense. So let's just stick with the case of incest. Though kares and mamzer status both apply in that situation, right? The child is not subject to kares. The child is simply a mamzer, sadly, but not kares. Kares applies to the parents. The parents don't become mamzers, right? They could marry other people and produce non-mamzer children. So there you go. This is a great question. If a betrothed woman is raped, is the resulting child a mamzer? No. I usually don't answer questions that I'm not 100% sure about. I'm just 99.999%, right? And we talked about this. Adultery is adultery. Being raped is not adultery. Sadly, if a woman is married to a priest and she is raped, the priest will have to divorce her in order to continue serving as a priest in the temple. He could give up that status and stay with her. And if he's not a priest, a woman is raped, she remains permitted to her husband, and the child is not a mamzer, and this was a tragedy. And I mean, that's a tragedy that could emerge from what happened on October 7th. And that's enough about that. Also, says Bill Eldridge, sidebar to your sidebar. Pope John Paul II was canonized just a couple of years ago, so he got promoted even beyond Pope. So, pays to make friends with the children of Israel, right? So there you go. He did a real solid for the Jewish people. And he was blessed, and he continued to be blessed in his life. Thank you, Bill. That's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. And we're going to try to do pages 74 and 75 tomorrow. So buckle your seatbelts. Have a good night.